Welcome back to the Lifestyle Practice Podcast. I'm excited to be with you today. Derek Williams, your host. And if you are watching this on one of our platforms with video, you will notice that I am in a home with walls not made out of whatever the walls of RVs are made out of. I'm in an actual home. Last year, during the holidays, we spent about 2 months in a cabin in Georgia, and we really enjoyed it. So this year, when it was coming closer to the holidays, we planned to basically hole up in an Airbnb or two. And that's been a lot of fun. There's a lot of things during the holidays that you take for granted: decorating and a Christmas tree and baking and community events, some of those things like that. So it's a little bit fun to take a break from the mobile nomadic lifestyle, even though that's still very much what we're doing in the sense that we're here for a month or so. But I'm glad to be with you, and I'm excited for this topic today. This is a question that I get relatively frequently. Even in the last week, I've been asked this question a couple times. First was during a call with a client when she's in her very first year of ownership, and basically asked the question, does it get easier? Is what I'm going through, is this normal? And should I expect for things to be like this forever, or does it get easier over time? And it's fun for me to be able to answer that question. The other place I was asked this is with another dentist that is no longer in clinical practice, but is more in the management phase of things. And I was talking to him and his wife, and he was explaining to me, he said, man, I was just getting so burned out in my private practice, and it was such a good move for me to be able to step away and step into a role like this. And he asked me if it was similar for me, if I was in a position where I was getting burned out. And it was fun. It was fun to answer and be able to do it in a genuine way, where I really actually felt like every year of practice ownership, every year of clinical dentistry got a little bit easier for me, a little bit more smooth, a little bit fewer bumps in the road, so to speak. So I want to talk about that today. What led to that? What led to me being able to experience dentistry in that way? And what are some things that you can do to be able to try and facilitate that more in your experience of dentistry and your experience of ownership? So I have a few different points. And the third point is what I'll spend the most amount of time on. The first point that I will make is that over time, you will generally feel more ownership in your practice. You will feel more confidence in your practice being yours and being willing to let it represent how you feel about life, being a little bit more genuine, being a little bit more authentic. This applies especially in acquisitions when we are in a position where we're buying someone else's practice. It's someone else's, they've been in it, they've been running, steering the ship, they've been treating patients the way that they do things. And sometimes we get in there and we feel like we have to fill their shoes, or we're constantly compared to the seller. And in that regard, it can be challenging where you just feel like you're always comparing yourself to the seller in some way. And over time, you'll develop, like I talked about, more ownership, more feeling like, yeah, this place is starting to feel like it's really mine. The same way that when you first move into a house, it feels a little bit foreign, it feels a little bit weird, maybe still a little bit scary at nights, just not knowing exactly the layout of the house, the neighborhood, stuff like that. So part of it is just a component of time settling into the situation. This equates to, over time, less willingness to put up with poor performers and an equal approach with patients, less willingness to put up with challenging and difficult patients. That was really fun for me to experience. Over time, as I became more confident in myself, more confident in my approach, more like I was hearing really good feedback from patients, I knew that they enjoyed the experience in the office, made me feel a little bit less scared about patients leaving. A perfect example is I had a hygienist that was with me when I bought the practice, and she wasn't a horrible performer, but she wasn't great. And I continued to put up with not perfect performance because of a fear that she had a lot of loyalty with the patient base. And if I let her go, that could be damaging to me. And I don't necessarily regret the decision looking back. I feel like I approached things in a strategic way, but eventually I reached the point where I felt enough confidence in myself and how I was treating patients and outcomes and patient satisfaction that at some point I basically said, you know what, if I'm going to be here and if this is my practice, this is what I want. I'm ready to let this person go. So I did. And that led to some of the most enjoyable times in my practice. I replaced her with an amazing hygienist. And looking back, it's interesting because you hear people all the time talk about firing someone, getting someone else in place, and you just the weight lifting off of their shoulders. And I've definitely coached people through this and heard this firsthand many times. So it was interesting as I basically had this exact same experience myself, thinking, you know what, maybe I should have done that a little bit earlier. So that's point number one, is just that over time you will feel more ownership, you will settle into things, and you'll feel more comfortable. Point number two is to set goals. And this podcast is coming out at a great time of year where essentially we're at the end of 2024. You're selling yourself short if you are not reviewing your practice monthly and yearly as far as your progress. And some of the best things that I think you can review at the end of the year are asking yourself questions like, what is my satisfaction with the performance of my practice this year? What was the production per day that we averaged this year? What is my overhead? What is the profit that I got out of this business? What were the most painful parts of my experience this year? And then basically taking all of that information and then using that to plan out the next year. How many days do you want to work next year? What do you want your profit to be? And then when we have those numbers, we can figure out, okay, what does our production need to be for the year, and divide that by the number of days that you're going to work. And then we know what your production per day needs to be. So setting goals is something that was very motivating. I've shared on the podcast before that ultimately I have realized that in life, I basically just want two things. I want love and I want growth. And you can definitely increase these things, and your practice is a great way to do this. We're interacting with people all day long. It's a great avenue and environment to practice loving yourself, loving your patients, loving your staff more, and also growing. There's so many different facets that you can always continue to grow as a dentist. That's one of the things that was so appealing to dentistry for me in high school. You can approach things from a business standpoint, a clinical standpoint, a communications standpoint. You've got relationships with patients for years. What a cool opportunity to continue to grow and improve in a lot of different ways. So that is number two, is to set goals for yourself. Be intentional. Work towards progress. Get the people in your corner that you need to be able to hold yourself accountable, to give you the tools to raise yourself to the next level. Not just because it's really great financially, but it's just a fun way to live life. There's nothing better, in my opinion, than getting someone above you in some aspect, some facet that can help you see things that you wouldn't have seen on your own and help you to grow at an accelerated rate. The last point that I want to touch on, which I said would be the longest one, is to lean into the challenges. You've heard me time and time again talk about the obstacle is the way. And I want to share a personal experience that I had when I was in kindergarten that has framed my experience of life ever since then. So I've actually started writing a book that I want to release on Kindle, mostly for my kids, just to talk about the lessons that I learned as a child in a story format that they can read. They all have Kindles. They love reading. So I think that will be such a fun way to put something out where they can access it and see that I can put something out there and hopefully maybe be able to learn something along the way. So I want to read this experience from my book. This is basically one of my first big lessons in life. So this will take me about 5 minutes to read through, and then I'll wrap up the podcast episode at that point. When I was 4 years old, I remember doing preschool through a program in my neighborhood. Some of the moms decided to work together on a local preschool program. They would take turns having the kids in the neighborhood going to each other's houses, and the mom in that home would teach us different things. I remember enjoying it and having a lot of fun. I enjoyed the feeling of being in someone else's house for a couple hours. Just being somewhere new was fun to experience. Different smells, different dynamics as far as relationships, or even different rules in the house were things that stuck out to me. When I was 5, I went to kindergarten at Salem Elementary School. I had the most loving teacher, Mrs. Jones. She was kind, gentle, and sweet. I remember thinking that she gave me extra care and special attention, but now I think probably most of us felt that way in that classroom. Kindergarten at that time for me was a half day, not a full day. It was a good jump from a couple hours in preschool to a half day with Mrs. Jones. I remember playing on the playground the first few days. I'd go out to the playground, feel like I didn't know anyone, or even the games that they were playing. I walked along the fence of the perimeter of the playground, hoping that I might recognize someone. Maybe someone would come and ask me to play. Over time, I got to know my classmates, made friends, and had a great time. I have a lot of fond memories of that year. First grade was a different story. First grade was a full day of school. I was nervous about that. I also got Mrs. Thorpe as my teacher, and I had heard that Mrs. Thorpe was strict and not very nice. I had a hard time the first few days and weeks in first grade. I had become so comfortable with Mrs. Jones. I had gotten to know my classmates in kindergarten. Now I had to start all over again. Things felt worse. I remember specifically one day going to school, sitting at my desk at the beginning of the class. Even now, as I think back on it, I remember the smells. I think it smelled like wet clay, maybe chalk. I was nervous. The memory of the smells initiated a response in my stomach to churn and get nervous. On this day, I remember thinking about how many hours looking at the clock until I'd be able to go back home. 7 hours. It almost seemed so long that it was incomprehensible. What would happen during those 7 hours? Who would I be with during lunch? What about recess? What if I didn't understand what we were learning? Luckily, on this day, we were doing a lesson with shaving cream on our desk, so it was fun. Squishing it between my fingers was a strange but enjoyable feeling. But even during the activity, I couldn't shake the thought of wondering, what was my mom doing? How could she be away from me for so long? What if she missed me? What if our house caught on fire while I was gone and my mom might need my help? I would be at school for so long. These are literally memories and thoughts that I had during that time. I'm not making this up or trying to think of what it would be like for a kid. One morning, I was really nervous about going to school. My stomach was churning. I was thinking about how much I didn't want to go. I'm guessing that my emotional breakdown caused us to be late because that day, my dad took me to school on his way to work, which didn't usually happen. Usually my mom would take me and walk with me to school. When my dad drove up to the sidewalk of the school, most of the kids were already inside. School was starting. I told my dad how much I didn't want to go. I cried. I remember thinking, there had to be another way where I didn't have to go through this. Okay, my dad responded. I'll take you home if you want. I felt so glad and relieved. My dad understood me and he was going to let me stay home. But, he said, you have to go tomorrow. And if you stay home today, it will probably be even harder to go to school tomorrow. This hit me like a ton of bricks. Even as I say it now, like I just get this wave of what that was like to hear my dad say that. I pictured myself going home today, thinking today about how it was going to be hard to go back to school tomorrow. I pictured myself going through all of this again tomorrow and it being even harder. He was right, I thought, but he had given me a choice. I felt like I was now the owner of my decisions. I had been presented with a choice. There were two options, one more painful than the other. I chose the less painful option. I'll go today, I said. I got out of the car and I walked inside. From that point on, I have thought back on that lesson from that day. It has come up often throughout my life. This lesson is what carried me through college. Even as a dentist, there were certain days that I wanted to call in sick. I owned the office. I could have canceled my patients and stayed home that day, but I could hear my dad's voice. You can stay home today, but if you do it, it'll be even harder to go tomorrow. Thank you, Dad, for giving me the choice and allowing me to learn through my decisions. Sometimes we just have to push through things that we don't want to do. And in my experience, when I choose to face things that I'm afraid of, I'm happier after. So that's that chapter or that experience from my book. And that has played through, and it does each day of my life in some way. And that is so much of what led to each year for me in clinical dentistry and in practice ownership for things to continue to get a little bit easier. It was because when the hardships came that I was able to ask the question, what am I going to learn from this? This was hard today, but I know that because it was hard today, it's going to be easier tomorrow. And because of that mindset and that understanding and that belief, it led me to tomorrow being easier than today, next month being easier than this month, next year. And I have a strong belief that is completely possible for all of us. So again, the 3 points for how every year can get easier for you as a dentist and as a practice owner is, number one is just the component of time, taking more ownership for your situation, being willing to make changes to allow the place to be yours. Number two is to set goals and to work towards those goals. And number three is to lean into your challenges. If you continue to run away from your challenges, it will continue to get harder. If you embrace them and face them head on, tomorrow will be easier than today. Thank you everyone for listening. Please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us, Derek, Matt, or Steve at thelifestylepractice.com. We're always happy to talk to you guys and see how we can help you in your practice journey. So until next time, keep crushing it, and we will talk to you guys next time.
Sicker than your average, sicker than your average.